Hi, it's Kit Finlay Bates here, and today's video is a tricky one on a topic that I have so far avoided, mainly because it causes all sorts of polarizing views and therefore non-constructive debate, but I thought it was time to bite the bullet and talk about it. The video has come from a discussion that I recently had on LinkedIn concerning a particular metric, namely the energy consumption per transaction of various financial systems, including Bitcoin. And when you use that metric, Bitcoin, of course, ends up way down on the efficiency stakes. But the problem I see is that that metric is fundamentally meaningless. And the reason why I came to that conclusion is as follows. Imagine a miner on Bitcoin decides to mine a block and includes no transactions in it. And furthermore, it does not claim the block reward. As far as I'm concerned, that means that for 10 minutes or so, you would have a block containing no transactions whatsoever. And as a result, the energy consumption per transaction during that 10-minute period would be infinite because you're dividing by zero. Energy use divided by number of transactions, where number of transactions equals zero. Therefore, divide by zero in mathematics, that is defined as undefined. And in general media speak, people will then say that it's infinite. So that to me is a kind of proof as to why energy consumption per transaction is a meaningless metric for Bitcoin, and suggests strongly that something else is going on here when you're looking at the energy consumption of Bitcoin. Now, in the discussion, people chimed in and said, but the Coinbase transaction in the block, that means you've got one transaction, so you're not dividing by zero and your argument falls down. Now, I would argue that a transaction typically involves the transfer of something from one party to another. Is going out and digging up some gold from the ground a transaction? Is me and another person not interacting a transaction? I would argue no. Now, of course, the Coinbase transaction has the word transaction in its name, and you could argue that your usual Coinbase transaction, where a number of Bitcoins are created out of thin air and then transferred to the ownership of the miner, qualifies as a transaction. But of course, in the example I'm giving, the miner doesn't claim the block reward, so there's no value. And therefore, I think Coinbase transaction is a bit of a misnomer. Just because I decide to call that tree over there a car doesn't mean I can suddenly hop into it and drive off to the supermarket to buy some groceries. And similarly, I think the use of the word transaction, although useful for the majority of Coinbase transactions, is not entirely accurate because of the peculiar transaction that I described. Now, some people have disagreed with me and say it's still a transaction, but I've not had a reasonable, rational argument from them as to why the absence of a sender and the absence of anything being transferred, i.e. you just have a receiver receiving nothing, why that would qualify as a transaction. So if any of you can come up with a good rational argument, I would be very interested to hear it, because it would be great to have my argument refuted. That's how you have reasonable discussions as far as I'm concerned. Now, of course, the question then becomes, well, what's the deeper issue here? And I think the deeper issue boils down to two things. One of them concerns external costs, and the other one concerns what is reasonable for us to spend energy on. And the first one, external costs, reflects the fact that we have a problem as a planet as a whole, which is that individual human beings or groups of human beings can do things and profit immensely from them, but the costs of them making this profit are defrayed onto the society as a whole. And this is typically described as the tragedy of the commons problem. If I can go out and make a huge profit by cutting down and burning vast swathes of the rainforest, or polluting vast tracts of land while I mine metals, and I don't have to pick up the tab for doing that, then there's an economic incentive for me to go ahead and destroy the planet. And the best solution we appear to have so far is to use governmental regulation, fines or charges carbon credits or whatever kind of schemes you want to come up with in order to force those external costs back onto the party who is responsible for them. But it turns out that this is a very tricky thing to organize. For starters, you have to coordinate somewhat in the region of 200 different countries, which have histories of, on the whole, not getting on very well with each other. In fact, as soon as you have more than 3 people, it seems that things start to go wrong with human beings, but that's another issue. And so when we look at Bitcoin and you look at the arguments for and against it, one of the problems we have is that there are 2 different parties. One party says this thing is incredibly valuable, it's the greatest invention of the last century, and yes, it does burn a lot of energy, but it's worth it for what we get from it and from where it may lead us. And then you have a second group that say, no, Bitcoin is worthless, it is junk, it is worse than a bunch of cheap plastic toys that you give to your kids on Christmas Day, and by Boxing Day they're all broken, and therefore any energy being spent on it is a complete waste of money. And these 2 views are irreconcilable. So as a result, we don't see proper debate. We just see shocking headlines to attract people's attention and get a knee-jerk reaction. Things like Bitcoin now using the annual energy consumption of insert medium-sized country of your choice here. And this doesn't really help the debate any further, but it's not unexpected because this is how human beings behave. They tend to entrench into one side or the other and then sling insults at each other. And it's all rather disappointing, to be honest. But I personally happen to fall in the camp of people who think that yes, although it's a lot of energy that's being used, ultimately this is something that may revolutionize the way that human society works for the good of people rather than those in positions of power or authority. And of course, given that I don't expect to be one of those people in a position of power or authority, it makes sense for me to therefore support it. As for why other people in my position don't support it, well, I guess that's up to their individual opinions as to whether they're happy with the status quo or not. Oh gosh, so we got sidetracked a bit into an environmental debate there, which is kind of what I've been avoiding for years now, but there you go. That's a video covering some of my thoughts on this topic. I hope you found it interesting. Do keep the discussions in the comments polite, please, because people slinging mud at each other achieves nothing other than getting everybody dirty. I hope you found this entertaining, and I'll see you in the next video soon. Bye for now.